Good evening, and welcome to the World War I Museum. There are a few seats here available. If some of you are out in the overflow area and would like to join us, feel free to come in. There are seats in the front row and scattered seats throughout the auditorium, and if you'd like to come in and join us, we'd like to have you. My name is Linda Trout. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement for the World War I Museum, and we're very pleased to have you with us this evening, and especially given the weather conditions. You all should get a gold star for just coming out in this weather. If you have not been to the National World War I Museum before, I hope that you will think about coming back, and when we're open and you can go through our exhibitions, we have a beautiful and nationally known museum. And as we start the commemoration of the First World War, which began 100 years ago this week, the actual hostilities, it's a wonderful time to come back and visit our museum. So we would look forward to seeing you. Tonight, we are proud to be partnering with the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education and the National Archives at Kansas City for this 8-part series, State of Deception, The Power of Nazi Propaganda. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Lori Cox-Paul, Director of Archival Operations at the National Archives at Kansas City, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening to everyone. Well, unlike the first two presenters in our Wednesday evening speaker series, Salo Aizenberg hails from the world of business rather than from academia. Having earned his MBA from Columbia Business School, he manages Downtown Investment Advisory, a registered investment advisory firm based in New York, a company he founded in October 2013 after a 20-year career in institutional finance and investing. In addition to his career in finance, over the last 2 decades, Mr. Aizenberg has amassed one of the world's leading collections of Judaica picture postcards, which serves as his connection to the subject of Nazi propaganda. Having come from a family of scholars and published authors in the areas of history and Judaica, writing and publishing was a natural next step for him. His first book, Postcards from the Holy Land, a pictorial history of the Ottoman era, 1880 to 1918, was published in 2010. In 2013, he authored Hate Mail, Antisemitism on Picture Postcards, published by the Jewish Publication Society, and this book was a finalist for last year's National Jewish Book Award. Combining his interest and expertise in both finance and Jewish studies, Mr. Aizenberg serves on the Board of Trustees and the Investment Committee of the Solomon Schechter School of Westchester. By sheer coincidence of scheduling, his father, Rabbi Isidoro Aizenberg, curated the exhibit Cruel Correspondence, Anti-Semitic Postcards, 1895 to 1930, which, in addition to State of Deception, is on display at the National Archives at Kansas City right now through October 25th. On loan from the Kupferberg Holocaust Resource Center and Archives at Queensborough Community College in New York, Cruel Correspondence features items from Salo's personal collection that reflect society's negative attitudes and growing hatred toward Jews. Please help me welcome Salo Aizenberg to Kansas City.
Thanks so much, Lori, for that great introduction. And thanks to everyone for coming out in the rain to hear about anti-Semitism. And also thank you to my hosts, the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, the National Archives of Kansas City, and the National World War I Museum. I had to write all that down. Couldn't remember all the names. Tonight's topic is ugly. I'll be right up front. It's not a fun topic. You're not going to like what you hear. The book that I wrote about it My wife will not read it. She refuses to read it, doesn't want to hear about it. Unfortunately, it's a topic that's more relevant than ever, especially with, we're not going to get political tonight, but especially with the news in the world today, with Israel interfacing with Jews. There's a lot going on, a lot of things happening, and I think this topic is more relevant than ever. Just a quick preview. Here's a postcard from Hungary from about the 1920s, showing a Jew in the form of a snake about to eat the world, with the caption saying the insatiable. So just a little preview of the topic. Before we get really into the postcards, I'm going to spend a little time talking about postcards, which you probably don't know much about other than something you might buy in the Caribbean and send back. But let's go into a little bit about postcards. So picture postcards started to become in popular use around the 1880s, 1890s, particularly the late 1890s. And there's a period for about 20 years from 1898, let's say, to through World War I that's considered the golden era of postcards. And during that time, literally billions of postcards were mailed every year. So some of the statistics, I think in the UK in 1906, there's a statistic of every man, woman, and child sending at least 50 postcards a year, several hundred million. And if you total up the postcards mailed over those 20 years in the golden era, it's probably more than 100 billion postcards. It was at a time when there was no telephone, photography was in its infancy, newspapers didn't really have too many pictures. It was really the best way to communicate with people. It was really what I call the text messaging or the Twitter system of that period. There was, at that time, mail was delivered twice a day. Even in this country, mail, until the 1950s, it was twice daily mail. It was more efficient then than it is now. You could send a letter in the morning in a local area, and it would get to your destination that afternoon. So it was really, advertisers used it, and not only was it a way to communicate, but it was really, it opened a window to the world. The pictures on the postcards had every possible topic imaginable. Villages, war, satire, politics, natural disasters, things that you don't see on postcards today. It was really a way for people to see what was going on in the world when photography was just really getting popular. Postcards are generally, in my view, underutilized by historians today. I took a tour of the museum here this afternoon. If anyone has seen it, there are actually two panels that have World War I postcards in them. World War I is probably one of the most documented events on postcards. There were probably, no exaggeration, 1 million different postcards of World War I published. And it's probably one of the best ways to learn about the imagery of World War I on the postcards. This golden era ended sometime after the war. The war devastated the economies, the printing presses shut down, and at the same time, there was improved communication, telephones, better photography. So the need for postcards, it was still there, but the billions that were sent each year declined rapidly. Just going to show a few. I've handled literally tens of thousands of postcards. Here, just a very small sample, just to get a feel for this golden era. This is a postcard from Paris from 1890. The Eiffel Tower was one of the first events that was documented on postcards. When it opened, people went up to the top of the Eiffel Tower and mailed a postcard. They bought a postcard up there and mailed it to whomever. So these Eiffel Tower postcards were one of the earliest postcards. Here's a postcard of an earthquake that devastated Messina in Italy in 1908. So images of disasters were documented on postcards. Volcanoes, earthquakes, anything you can imagine. War images were on postcards. Here's a postcard of Harvard University. These are these multicolor lithographic postcards with different images. This type of postcard was very popular around the world. This is from 1898. This is a postcard of the Wright brothers airship from 1910 doing a tour around the United States. This is an actual photograph. At the time, photographs were converted into postcards. People may have seen family pictures in that era were turned into postcards. And again, that's just four. We could spend a whole lecture just on various postcards around the world. So let's connect. Why postcards? Why anti-Semitism? Why me? The answer is I have a very strong personal interest in history, in old things, and antiques. So I was introduced to postcards at some antique show, started going to shops, and got more and more interested in it through eBay, dealers, auctions over the years. And as I was collecting postcards, I started noticing that there's this genre of postcard called anti-Semitic postcards, and it intrigued me. And that's really just a brief overview why I decided to collect postcards. Anti-Semitism, it was interesting to me. It's still a phenomenon that's widespread around the world. We live in America now. It's probably the best place for Jews in the history of the world, but it's still present. And I was not an expert on anti-Semitism, but as I was collecting and looking at them and handling them, I noticed something about the postcards that you don't find anywhere else in studies of anti-Semitism, which I'll get to in a minute. Just interlude, the postcards are all from the 1890s to 1920s era. So that's a really important aspect here, because it's before the Holocaust. Showing postcards of anti-Semitism from the Holocaust, from Germany in the 30s and 40s, is not really very surprising. You would expect that postcards from Germany in the 30s and 40s would be anti-Semitic, and they were, but that's not really the point. The point is to look at postcards from the 1890s, 1920s as really a precursor to the Holocaust. Postcards, why are they important? They're tangible, accessible evidence. I have these postcards. They're physical, historical evidence, and in an era where there's Holocaust denial and there's denial that in certain circles that Jews didn't really have anything to do with Israel or Jerusalem, tangible evidence is important. So let's continue discussing why are postcards important. How do we typically learn about anti-Semitism? Hitler, Ahmadinejad from Iran, Karl Lueger, who was an anti-Semitic mayor of Austria. So political leaders. That's when we think about anti-Semitism, we think about political leaders. We think about people of influence. Martin Luther, Henry Ford was anti-Semitic, Mel Gibson. And then newspapers and the media. So you might have heard of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and different newspaper publishers, Drumont, La Libre Parole from France in the 19th century. And then we hear about large events, Holocaust, pogroms, expulsions, and then rabble-rouser events, what I call blood libels and lynchings. So these are very high-level, popular events, leaders. But what we never really learn about is what the typical person, what did the average Joe or Jane, middle-class worker, regular person, what were they thinking? What were they doing in relation to anti-Semitism? And what we see with the postcards is that they're distinct from all these other forms because postcards were used by average people. They were used every day to send little notes in the mail, and that person had to go buy the postcard. So they obviously saw what the image was like. So this had nothing to do with Hitler. It had nothing to do with an intellectual or a newspaper publisher. And postcards also, interestingly, it's a proactive act. You have to go buy the postcard, you have to put the stamp on it, you have to write the note, you have to go to the post office, you have to mail it. It's not like, oh, I just read the newspaper or some anti-Semite said this and I heard about it. So it's a little bit different. So this is sort of the key thesis of the book and why I believe postcards are unique here. And what I have written here, anti-Semitism on postcards was a chilling form of hatred, forming part of day-to-day activity, occurring millions of times per annum, and subtly delivered across the population by the government-run postal system, which I think is important. The post office delivered these hate messages, and it was a government-run entity, and then people collected these postcards. So there were definitely collectors of these postcards. And what I think it proves is that anti-Semitism, it was really a phenomenon that cut across the population. Regular people were involved in buying these postcards and perpetrating anti-Semitic acts. And I think even further, I don't think when people were buying these postcards, they were thinking about it too much. It was very casual. It was based on just common knowledge that Jews were a certain way. And buying this anti-Semitic image was nothing that called their attention, seemed wrong, seemed alarming, seemed like something that they should talk about with their kids in a special way. It was no different than how we think about a baseball game. So let's get a little bit deeper into the anti-Semitic postcards. Who published the postcards? Germany was the #1 leader. They were not only the #1 leader in anti-Semitic postcards, they were the #1 leader in publishing all kinds of postcards. They had the best printing presses and printing methodologies. And no surprise, they were the leader in anti-Semitic postcards. Then France and the territories, the colonial territories of France in Africa. And then Austria, Hungary, Russia, and Ukraine. At that time, the borders shifted constantly with different wars. So sometimes it was Russia, sometimes it was Germany. Poland was part of that also. And then Great Britain, the United States. I would say the real big four publishers are Germany, France, Great Britain, and the US. And typically countries without Jews did not really publish anti-Semitic postcards. Today, the only place where we find anti-Semitic postcards is in the Muslim world, which shouldn't be a surprise. The only difference is there are no Jews in the Muslim world, but they're still publishing them. The next interesting thing that I noticed with going through the postcards is that we can actually rank the virulence of the anti-Semitism in a country just by looking at the postcards. So if we kind of rank them from worst to, quote, best, Germany is #1. They had the worst postcards, the worst imagery, really just cutting right to the heart of the matter. Jews are filthy animals, they must be expelled. And really when I'll show you these postcards, it's a clear precursor to the Shoah, to the Holocaust. In Hungary, there's some postcards from Hungary. The first one, the first image in the presentation, pretty much matched it. And not surprising, the Judaica party today, which is very anti-Semitic, has won 17% of the vote. France was #2. Their postcards were pretty vile, but a notch less than Germany. And then Great Britain, #3 in their virulence. And then the United States was the least virulent of the postcards, really focusing on the connection of Jews and money and large noses. That's pretty much the theme of American postcards. I'll get to images soon. One common theme that we see in all the postcards, which is really a very important theme, is the idea of dehumanization. So no matter which country published the postcard, the Jew was always showed in an ugly, warped appearance. Every possible physical feature you can think of was bad. Noses, the bodies were misshapen, large hands, large feet, ugly, big, fat lips, the legs, bowed legs, and really kind of tying it to the Holocaust. The idea of dehumanization was an important part of really preparing the people in Germany and elsewhere to get this idea that Jews are the way they're portrayed in these postcards. People say, if you look at the history of Jews in this country, that the physical perception of Jews changed with Hank Greenberg, the baseball player, and Miss America Bess Meyerson in 1945, who refused to change her name from a Jewish name. And that sort of started to shift in the late 40s, the perception of how Jews were viewed in this country physically. So here are now some postcards, and we'll focus on the theme of dehumanization. The nose, obviously the common feature, and here the caption says "Vel who knows," which is a play on words on the Yiddish pronunciation of "well," who knows. This is an American postcard. Here's another American postcard showing the deformed body. Note the nose, note the lips, note the size of the hands, the eyebrows. This is a postcard from France from about 1900. Again, all these postcards are from the late 1890s to about World War I. Here they show the Jew Levi Abraham with horns. I won't go into the history of why people thought Jews had horns, but the French caption talks about the Jew having a special hat holder on his head. This is a postcard from the Austria-Hungary. And on the right side, you'll see a Jewish person this is a spa town, Marienbad, and there are all these other people waiting for the bathroom. And the Jewish person on the right side can't hold it in. And he defecates, and you can see the dog next to him defecating. So really they're making that connection that the disgusting Jew who can't hold it in. There's a blow-up of that image. Here's a postcard from Germany showing a Jew named Hirsch, and this sort of childish look with the ugly body, sort of covered in mud, and you can see the stout German washing him off. It's subtle, but it's clear. And then the German postcards take it one step further. So they don't just show a dehuman body, they start comparing the Jews to animals. So here the caption says, "From the vulture to the mire." So the Jew is like a vulture. And one step further, this is another German postcard showing the family Lowy, which is a Jewish name that actually happens to also mean lion in German. And here you can see the Jewish noses, the faces, and they're chewing on bones. And you can also, another thing to note here is the presence of children. So that was fair game. So that's one thing we'll learn with anti-Semitism. Children were not off limits. One more postcard from Germany. This postcard shows animals with the faces of Jews behind bars, which, in my view, this is a pretty clear precursor to ghettos and the Shoah. So here we're actually literally seeing Jewish animals behind bars in a German postcard. Here's one image. You can sort of see the Jewish lion face with the hooked nose. And it's also a play on words because the animals Lowy, Bar, Wolf, and Hirsch are Jewish names that happen to also mean animals. Lion, bear, wolf, and deer. Okay, so we covered the topic of dehumanization. Now I'm going to take you country by country, and we'll get a sense of the themes that I'm talking about. And we're going to shift back to the U.S., which, as I mentioned, were the least vile postcards, really focusing on the theme of Jews loving money. So here's just a woman, obviously Jewish, with $5 million, with a Yiddish Weihnacht. And here you can see a preview of the message. Harry, this is me in Trafford City. So this was mailed. Next image is of the pawnbroker. The pawnbroker here, I. Cohen. And that was a constant theme, this idea of the Jewish pawnbroker taking advantage of the poor, innocent Gentile is a common theme in American anti-Semitic postcards. I'm going to show you the other side of this postcard. The message says, "Am feeling fine and dandy, will write a letter later, had some rain last night, Norm." So this is typical. So as I said, I tied it to Twitter and Facebook. It's really, I don't think it's more than 140 characters. It's a little 1911 version of a tweet with I call an anti-Semitic emoticon. That's what it was. Norm did not think at all. I can assure you that Norm didn't think twice about the content of this postcard. He could have bought a postcard showing a baseball game or a picture of his town train station. U.S. postcard, the nose theme. Here's a caricature of a Jew, kind of looking childish. Business. You can notice the I in business, making fun of the Yiddish. So this is about as bad as it got for the U.S. postcards. One other theme that I will cover in the United States postcards is the theme of exclusion. So most people don't remember, thankfully, I guess, that there was a time into the 1950s when Jews were not allowed in many hotels. And that's really what led to the development of sort of the Jewish hotel industry. If you're familiar with the Catskills in New York and hotels like the Concord and Grossingers, that was all a response to having to create their own hotel and resort system. So here's an innocent postcard for some no-name little cottage in upstate New York, Tannersville, New York. Clearly says, "No Jews taken." And here's a postcard from the Marine Terrace Hotel in Miami Beach, Florida, which looks innocent enough on this side. When we turn it over, this is an advertisement for the hotel. What's the first feature that they want to highlight? Strictly Gentile clientele, which is more important than the dining and the parking. So postcards like these abound, showing it's a historical record of the exclusion in the United States here. Here's another interesting one from the U.S. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Long Island and Queens, New York, but in the early 1900s, they were developing the commuter railroad system from Manhattan into Long Island. And as that railroad system was being developed, all the towns on farmland in Queens and Long Island were being bought up by real estate developers, and they sold plots of land to people to build homes. And they advertised for it. So here there's an advertisement for Douglaston, Long Island. It's actually in Queens. And if you look, can you see that right there? It says 2,500 restricted lots with over a mile of shorefront. So these real estate developers would not sell these plots of land to Jews, and blacks, I would add also. And here's another one on the bottom. I just put the caption here from Hollis Terrace, Long Island, the same thing, 2,400 restricted lots. So actually, if you look at the history, if we want to do a comprehensive history of the growth of Queens and Long Island and the Long Island Railroad, you really can't talk about it without including a heavy element of anti-Semitism. These exclusionary real estate transactions were struck down at some point, I don't know all the details, by the Supreme Court in the late 40s, that you could not restrict these lots. And there were even some of the, when they did sell them to people, there were even covenants that they couldn't be resold to Jews, and all those were also struck down by the Supreme Court. Okay, so that's the United States. I'm going to take it one notch higher to British postcards. So here you can take a second to read the caption there. So the idea here is the firemen are going to put down a fire, and all the Jew could think about is his own needs. So it's really this idea that Jews were outside of society. They were not productive members. They were taking advantage and only concerned about themselves. I'm now going to show you the other side of this postcard. Which was mailed in 1908, and let's read the message. Dear Ethel, thank you for the PB. I don't know what that is. Hope you are a good girl. The school board has been after you today. May Baycook has been to see me tonight. She does miss you. So do I. With love to all. From Mama. Your garden is looking A1. So here it's obviously a mother sending it to, looks like her daughter, a good girl. And it's kind of interesting to think that she would send her daughter an anti-Semitic postcard. But it's not that interesting if you understand that at that time, the idea of Jews being a certain way was just common knowledge. There was no extra thought involved. This wasn't spectacular. Ethel, Mama, they didn't think about this at all. It wasn't interesting. It just was. It was just part of the culture at that time, that Jews were a certain way, and sending a postcard depicting that was not interesting. Another British postcard, beware, the theme of beware of Jews. So you can see the Jewish person on top here, Cohen, Christians awake. So you can see it's a little bit more virulent, a little more aggressive than the American postcards. You can read the caption, again, that the theme of Jews loving money and the making fun of the Yiddish language. Okay, now let's move on to France, which, as I said, is one notch higher in its virulence. Let's start with the Dreyfus Affair. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Dreyfus Affair, but it's one of the most prominent events of anti-Semitism in history, where a Jewish army officer in France was falsely accused of passing secrets to the German army, and even though it was obviously clear that he didn't do it and they actually knew who did it, the army and the state refused to acknowledge the evidence, convicted Dreyfus, and only 15 years later was he finally exonerated. So here's a picture of Dreyfus with a large nose, and he actually did not have a large nose. And ironically, he's wearing a German hat. So the Dreyfus Affair happened in the 1890s, just when postcards became in widespread use. And it's a very well-documented event in Postcards, the Dreyfus Affair. So there are many anti-Semitic postcards of the Dreyfus Affair. Here's another French postcard, a little more aggressive. Here that the Jews are, the theme of the Jews being in control of finances, control of banks, starting to get a little bit more than, oh, they just like money and they have big noses, to a little bit more that they're sort of just wretched people who we need to watch out for. The French sort of say, no, they're really in control here. We got to watch out. And here's a large Jewish individual carrying money bags, stepping on the banks of Paris and Berlin. Here's a very detailed and interesting postcard that's captioned here, France, the Jew, watch out, they're the enemy. And you can see here, this is a sort of this large multi-tentacle Jewish demon. And these are representations of the French people and the French state, the French army. There's a blow-up of that image. I won't go into all of it, but it says Talmud over there. And basically all these words are different scandals and different events that happened in France that's blamed on the Jews. This is the Panama Canal, all kinds of things. So this is a very, very powerful postcard that really views the Jews as a worldwide scourge that's controlling things, and we have to watch out for this enemy. So you can see a little bit more aggressive than the British and American postcards. Now we'll get into more German postcards. And here is a Jewish woman with the nose literally in the form of a spider, a demonic spider, taking coins from a cowering German person. And here is a postcard, interesting postcard, which was actually published in the Polish part of Germany at the time. And the caption here says, "Neither here, neither there." And you can see a cowering Jewish family standing on a narrow wooden bridge, flanked on both sides by a threatening dog and sort of this evil jester. And in my view, when I saw this foreshadows the idea of a ghetto. Neither here, neither there. We don't really want you anywhere. We're going to box you in a certain area here. And this is from 1900, this postcard. Again, note the child. So here's another postcard. I'm not showing you the front of the postcard because the front of the postcard has nothing anti-Semitic about it. But what the person who bought this postcard did is they wrote a message, they stamped the postcard, and then they bought separately an anti-Semitic sticker. And they put it on the postcard, and it's a quote by a famous German writer, Goethe, that says, "The Israelite nation has never been worth much." You can read it. So again, this shows the very proactive nature of the ingrained hatred, that someone actually didn't even just buy an anti-Semitic postcard, they bought a sticker, put it on the postcard, and mailed it out. Here's a postcard from Poland that basically shows on the left a Russian-Polish Jew, and on the right a Russian-Polish louse, with the idea that they're comparable. So, dehumanization. So what did the Germans, some of these countries, what was the solution to all this? And this is really taking it to the next level, foreshadowing the Holocaust. And really the fantasy that the Germans especially had here was that the Jews need to be expelled. And expulsion was a common activity. Jews were expelled throughout the Middle Ages from dozens and dozens of cities and countries. And once you see these postcards, the question I asked myself when I saw the postcards is, if you were a Jew living in one of these countries at that time and you saw a postcard in 1900 of you being expelled, what would you think? What would you think knowing that people are buying and delivering these postcards? So here's a postcard from Poland, and it shows a Polish person with a whip here and a long line of Jews going to France. And it's basically, this is the Polish export. So here's a depiction of the Polish fantasy of expelling the Jews. Here's a postcard from Austria. This is Vienna over here. And you can see the Jews are being literally kicked out, and a whole group of Jews here to the train station. Get out of here. Here's a postcard from Hungary. The caption over here says, 100 Jews in a row, deportation, Nathan goes in the front, bundles on their backs, by Luger father. Luger is Karl Luger, the mayor in the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. So here is literally a postcard that's advocating and saying the word deportation. And you can see a long line of Jews leaving. And then it gets really interesting because the top here is a little message that says, August 4th, 1901, many heartfelt greetings from all of us. As if the image wasn't there. I would love to go back in time and ask the sender and the recipient what they were thinking. And I think the answer is not much. Here's a postcard from Germany, also showing expulsion. Here's a German depiction of some kind of German god. And he's holding a sword, and he's telling these group of Jews, which are clearly Jews, and he's basically saying, get out of here. And where are they supposed to go? Anyone see that sign? To Palestine. Get out of here, go to Palestine. In May 2010, Helen Thomas, a prominent White House reporter, remarked the Jews should get the hell out of Palestine and go home to Poland and Germany. So it is doubtful that she ever saw this postcard. Here's another postcard, which again, in 1900, depicts the German fantasy, which less than 50 years later would be realized. This word here means the future. And here are German soldiers kicking out Jews. Now look over here. This is a stamp from Israel from 1950. And what happened here is a collector who once owned this postcard, who lived in Israel in 1950, 2 years after the State of Israel was born, took this postcard to his local post office, bought a stamp of Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, and told the postmaster to postmark this stamp, postcard this post, you know what I mean, to put the stamp, the postmark. So he basically said, excuse my language, screw you, I'm here. So I found this postcard very Very ironic. So now it passed into my hands. As I mentioned, which should be shocking, is that in all these postcards, children were fair game. So there was no hesitation to show Jewish children in the same vile manner as adults. So here I blew up a few close-up images so you can see how children were depicted. Now the bulk of the book really is, and the theme is the postcards from as a precursor to the Holocaust, and how these images were ingrained in daily thought by the average person on a widespread basis. The idea that Jews were a certain way was what I call common knowledge. It was as obvious as the earth goes around the sun. Jews are like this. They're ugly, evil, money hungry. But I do cover a little bit in the book some of the anti-Israel postcards from the modern era. And one of the first areas that are covered, I'll show you this interesting postcard, is this idea of anti-Israel libel. So this constant idea that Jews are destroying holy sites. So this is a constant theme, even recently, that the Jews are destroying holy sites. So this idea that the Jews are destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I found a postcard that proves that these lies started many decades ago. This is a postcard from 1949. This is a year after the State of Israel was born. And in its war of independence, there was a war that they fought, obviously, a war of independence. And this postcard from Great Britain, who was the colonial power that was not so happy with the Jews in Israel at the time, published this postcard that says, "Lest we forget Zionist mutilation of the holy places." And this image here is of the Lutheran Church in the Old City of Jerusalem, which is in perfectly good condition today. So really in the broken cross here. So really this idea of accusing Jews, Israel, of desecrating, destroying, it's a libel started the minute Israel was born. Today, I would say that same casual and ingrained day-to-day discourse, common knowledge anti-Semitism exists in the Muslim world. There's no question about it. You can read that quote. So this idea of Jews being, this stereotype of Jews being both domineering and wretched, helpless and bloodthirsty. Those same themes that I just showed you in the postcards now exists in the Muslim world. I'm going to show you one Muslim world postcard. This is from Iraq from the 1980s. Self-explanatory. Again, notice how they co-opted the Nazi themes. And again, the focus is on the 1890s, 1920, but a lot of these images are found today. So it's not quite over. This is a postcard from one of the largest, a newspaper image from one of the largest newspapers in Germany. Basically the bloodthirsty Jewish image connected to Israel today. This was in the Sunday Times in January 2013, showing Netanyahu as literally this bloodthirsty, pretty anti-Semitic image, even if you don't agree with Netanyahu. The British Sunday Times. They came out then retracting and saying they apologize and all this stuff afterwards. This is from the official website of the Belgian Education Ministry. Teachers were asked to analyze the cartoon, given 3 choices. This is a Palestinian fleeing Jews. Jews want the entire area of Palestine back, or Jews call Palestine Israel. But again, sort of using the Holocaust imagery in Gaza. And once it was exposed, the official Belgian education government agency took it off. I'm pretty much done. I'm going to show you one last image as food for thought. So I saw this image about a year ago, and it struck me. This was put out by an American Indian group that protested the caricature of the Cleveland Indians, which you've all heard about. It's nothing new. But then they created what I thought was remarkable, these baseball caps showing the New York Jews and the San Francisco Chinamen with the same sort of funny, stereotypical caricatures that we would all shockingly view as anti-Semitic or anti-Asian. And what they're saying is, look how you're depicting us with this bright red skin, also big noses, and this hysterical teeth. Stop doing that. It's racist. And I think they're right. And I think it just becomes something that's sort of ingrained in our culture, that it's just okay. It just is, these are American Indians, and, what's the big deal? But I think it sort of cuts to the same idea that there's sort of an ingrained common knowledge and acceptance that doesn't call anyone's attention. I think that's the main thing when I say that people bought those anti-Semitic postcards and it didn't bother them. They didn't think anything was wrong, because it was just common knowledge. I think the same thing. I think this is wrong, and a lot of people just don't realize it because they just don't. I don't know what the word is. Unaware. So that's it for the formal presentation. And I think if there's questions, I'm happy to answer things.
Thanks to Mr. Aizenberg for that fascinating presentation. We have got microphones at the bottom of each staircase, so if anybody has any questions, please just come down to the microphones and ask your question. For those who are in the auditorium lobby, you're more than welcome to come down and ask questions as well. So maybe we can start with one of the things that struck me was I was curious if there was a particular moment that sparked your fascination with postcards, and if you could talk about that a little bit and how you got your start being interested in postcards.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just it was a personal interest in history, and when you start seeing hundreds of these postcards, I just showed you 4 examples, but you can go into, if you really delve into it, you will see incredible images of cultures, ethnicities, disasters, just interesting things that will fascinate any historian. And as I said, if you go to the exhibits here, there are shocking images of destruction in World War I on postcards. So I think it was just this natural, great curiosity and interest in history, and then my own Jewish background drew me to anti-Semitism in that study.
A question on this side?
I was just wondering why, can you hear?
Yes.
Why the Jewish people? I mean, why did they get, why did people pick the the Jewish people to pick on.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's a broader topic on the history of anti-Semitism, but if you go back into it, it relates to the origin of Christianity and its sort of inherent conflict with Judaism, and really the origin of that as Jews having killed Jesus, and really viewing the separation of Christianity from Judaism, and how those stereotypes started to develop as a way to put down Judaism as really the old religion and the new religion. And it's not necessarily, it has things to do with Christendom, not politics and things like that, and the new, and popes and leaders at that time, but it's really something that developed in the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century. That's beyond the scope of discussion now.
It's just like Israel, such a small little area, and everybody, all those people want it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I talk about is that one of the books I used for research was called History of an Obsession. And the idea that, especially in Germany, there was an obsession with Jews. And what I tell people now, without really bringing in today's Israel-Gaza conflict into the mix, whatever side you're on, whatever you believe, there's no doubt that the world is obsessed with what's going on there. There are only 14 million people, Jews in the world, out of 7 billion people. But for some reason, what happens with Jews is blown out of proportion. Again, whatever side you're on, I'm not even debating the right or wrong of each side. It's more the fact that you can't turn on the TV and not hear about it, to the complete absence of everything else going on in the world, as if these 14 million people are the most important thing in the universe. So you're right.
I don't know, I'm always afraid I'm going to ask a dumb question, but I don't know if it had to do with Jesus being a Jew. I mean... Again,
these are broader topics. It cuts to the history of anti-Semitism, and what you're saying, there are elements of truth to everything you're saying.
Thank you very much.
I really wanted to address what you just said as well. I understand that you're covering the topic of the postcards and this 1890s to 1920 era, but to say that it began really with the differentiating Christianity with Judaism, how would you explain, for instance, Herod's slaughter biblically and Pharaoh in the days of Moses that are pre-Christian? Because the answer of why the Jewish population, being such a small percentage, is so persecuted, I just have another theory. So I just wondered how you...
Okay, I don't want to get too detailed in the history of anti-Semitism. Most historians, if you look at the history of anti-Semitism, won't really bring things about Egypt and the pharaohs and things like that to what's going on in anti-Semitism there today. Most historians who talk about modern anti-Semitism and the Holocaust will usually start things with the connection and the rise of Christendom.
Mm-hmm. I understand, and
So,
there's no
and you
doubt,
might be right, but...
there's no doubt that that's,
right.
I see that very strongly. I just wanted to say that a theory that I have is, as a Gentile, is that because, this is just my opinion, is that I believe that the Jewish people being special and chosen was to bring about truth and light to the world through Scripture, the prophets. I mean, and it's according to my belief, bring Messiah. And that there's a baseless hatred against Jewish people that's not explainable in human terms. Because I believe it's spiritual and it's from the pit of hell.
I agree that it's baseless and unexplainable. in terms of most Jews today, I'd say the vast majority of Jews today, I'm going to say 98%, don't really think about the idea of chosen or anything like that. I think
know.
that's...
I know, but I do.
You do.
And I want to say, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the scriptures and for all the good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We've got time for a couple more questions over on this side.
Let me return to postcard.
Yeah.
Have comparative studies been done with postcards and blacks, for example, in the United States?
Of what?
Of the way blacks have been treated postcard-wise in the United States?
No, it's a good question. Are you done?
Yeah.
A book could be written of just that topic.
Okay.
So you could do a whole historical study of black racism on postcards. And you can do it in the United States, and you can also do it with the way the French and Germans depicted the blacks in their African colonies, which were also pretty vile. So yeah, absolutely. And you can also do it the way Asians were depicted as well in this country, as well as overseas with the colonies in Asia. So yes, you could do 2 other books, which I'm not going to do.
Do you have a question on this side over here?
You take a question from a Presbyterian?
Sure.
We're supposed to be the greatest friends that Israel has right now here in this country. Why do you suppose our media today, our national media, only talks about the bad things that are happening to the Palestinians and nothing about the rockets that are falling in Israel?
Again, I agree with you completely. I think stepping back and a little bit against who's right or wrong, one, there is this obsession with Jews, which is hard to explain but exists. I don't know. I don't really know.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's an element of a minor. I think it's more ignorance, in my opinion. There's a lot of ignorance. I think the Palestinians do a very good job of manipulating the media. I think the Europeans are easily manipulable. The UN is grossly anti-Semitic, but then the U.S. media may not be aware of that and parrots what the UN says. I think there's a far leftist community which has to be anti-Israel, not necessarily anti-Semitic, and that cuts through. So I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think the good news is that you have a Congress that's 99%, maybe 8 congressmen vote against some resolution, anti-Hamas, pro-Israel, 100% of senators. So I don't know. There's a whole, you can debate the media and why it seems like you have a polarization, whichever side you're on, from one channel to another channel, and there's no middle ground, unfortunately. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got one final question.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. My question is really about education, because I believe that that's the most important thing to conquer some of these areas that you've just discussed in the last minute. Do you do presentations to educational institutions, schools? And my particular interest is, I feel, and I'm not a teacher, and I don't mean to insult any teachers or teachers of history, but I feel like there's a lack of education about a lot of these topics, particularly about anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and things in public schools in particular. What's your feeling about that? And I personally, once again, feel it's very important to educate the young people about what has happened. I was fortunate to have a great history teacher in high school that taught me about the Holocaust, and that was back in the late 60s. And so what's your stance on that?
No, I think you're right. I think education, ignorance, in my opinion, is the biggest enemy. So the question on why is the media showing things a certain way, I think there's a great ignorance. I think most people who would actually travel to Israel and spend 2 days in Israel would have a completely different view, and they say, I thought this place was like this. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think hopefully writing this book and having exhibits like this helps out. And I think, this country has come a long way in many ways, whether everyone in this audience likes it or not. We have a black president. Even in my own, I'm only 44, I can remember the treatment of how gay people were talked about in this country was a completely different way in the 80s than it is today. So I think general walls of discrimination are falling, whether you agree with it or not. So I think there's great progress in this country. I think Jews are in the best position historically, as I said, anywhere in history ever, maybe except for Israel. But outside of Israel, Jews in this country are in their best position ever. We had a Jewish vice president, had won more votes, right? Lieberman. People say that when Chelsea Clinton married a Jewish person, that was also some big watershed moment. But so I think we've come a long way. But more education is needed, and I think particularly when you see things about Gaza and Israel, I think there's great misinformation.
Yeah, locally here, we had a terrible crime committed a few months ago.
I know.
In April, are you aware of that? And I think that has heightened some awareness here, but it just needs to march forward with our kids. So thank you.
Agree.
Thank you to everybody for your questions. Just a couple of quick announcements before we all depart. Mr. and Mrs. Wester, we have your car keys at the main entrance to the museum, so please stop by and get those. We hope everybody will come out in 2 weeks from tonight on Wednesday, August 20th at 7 p.m. The next lecture in the State of Deception series will examine imagery of women and girls in Nazi propaganda. And then also, as we talked about earlier, your beautiful, lovely evaluation sheets. Please take the time to fill those out. Your feedback is very important. So thanks again to Mr. Aizenberg, and thanks for visiting the museum this evening.
Well, it all blends together. Sure. That's why.